I've been here in the MTC. I've been in probably most of those roles. I've been to the MTC sort of time and again, whether it was Science Minister, Business Secretary, and all the rest. I do remember one time when I was addressing the Conservative Party conference that was taking place in Birmingham at the time. And one of the things that I found when I was a minister was just how thrilling and exciting it was to see some of the innovation and the activity that was going on in places like the MTC. But it's very difficult for the layman, as it were, to kind of see that. So I hit on a plan which was quite high wire. So rather than give my speech in the ICC in Birmingham, I did a live outside broadcast from here in the MTC. And so for my 20-minute slot, I interviewed researchers, some of the staff of the MTC, apprentices, the then mayor of the West Midlands. It was pretty high wire because just before we started, the line went down, and this was being broadcast live on Sky TV and the BBC. But it came good just in time, and I was told by people in the hall that it sort of blew everyone away. Just the kind of seeing, appropriate today, big robot behind you. Remember the filming of it. And it gave people who otherwise wouldn't be able to, just a sense of grounds for the optimism that we have in this country. In fact, so successful was it that all of the other speeches that took place that day were thought to be a bit dull by comparison. And I don't know whether this had anything to do with it, but it turned out to be my last speech to the Conservative Party conference because I was dropped from the cabinet afterwards. I don't think this is to do with the MTC. I think it was to do with the dispute I had with the new Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, on Brexit. But one of the things that I did in office, as has been said, was to develop an industrial strategy for the country. When I left office, unfortunately, the government that was of my party dropped it, which I thought was a real misguided act, an act of vandalism, really, because it was put together, quite meticulously, consensually, including, I'm sure, from input from people in this room, and just at a time when the rest of the world was looking around and seeing the revolution in technology, of which we're talking about one of them today, and thinking, well, perhaps we better look and plan ahead for that. And so for the UK to have dropped the ball, and certainly dropped the industrial strategy, just at that time, I think was a real mistake. And it's worth in saying a bit about where we are now on industrial strategy. It's perhaps worth understanding a bit of why there has been, particularly on the kind of right and the centre-right, a view that industrial strategy is not really something that governments should do. I think it's a kind of misguided view, but it rests on this idea that it's not really for governments to peer into the future and make an assessment for how the world is going to be different in the future than it is today. I've always thought that odd applying to industrial policy, when you'll all be familiar that members of parliament, politicians are not usually short of opinions and views as to other parts of the world, how the economy is going to go, how the war in Ukraine is going to pan out. People are used to have opinions, but somehow there's been this bizarre thing that when it comes to the future of industry, we must be silent. There's another aspect. My friend and colleague, and in fact my predecessor as Science Minister, David Willetts, talked about. He wrote about the unknowability of technological advances, which again has been a kind of British thing. That even if not just policy that you shouldn't really kind of anticipate and reflect on. There's something about technology that it is literally unknowable, and if you try to kind of guess it, then you'll be kind of found out. But again, this seems to be a kind of strange thing. On the kind of first point, and I used to say to my Conservative colleagues who regarded themselves as being understanding of business. Can you imagine if you're on the board of a company, if you chair the board of a company, and you have the AGM, and a question from the floor in an auditorium like this from one of the shareholders said, can you set out the strategy for the future? And if the board or the chairman said, well, we haven't really got one, we thought we'd sort of play it by ear, see what comes along. I don't think they'd last long as chairman of the board. And yet, the idea that a government should not have a view of the future. And when it comes to particular technologies, of course, you're going to have 2020 foresight. But that's not to say that you can't make some assessments of where it would be right to mobilise and to kind of shepherd your resources. So when I think back to the industrial strategy that I was responsible for developing in 2016 and 2017, we identified 4 what we called grand challenges. They were AI and the analysis of big data, the transition to clean growth, the technologies around supporting an ageing population, and the future of mobility. Now, it seems to me hard to say, well, these are kind of ridiculous speculations, that's the kind of finger in the air. How do we know that? It is possible to look at what's happening, to look around the world, and to know that these technologies, these areas of focus, all of which we have UK strengths in, are likely to be in demand in the future. And then to ask yourself the question, what can we do to make sure that we are well equipped to meet that demand? Part of the accusation against industrial strategy, or the disapproval of it, was that, you've probably heard the phrase, in the 1970s it was all about picking winners. And the winners turned out to be losers, and if they were picked, then shed loads of public money was sent to subsidise them. And it's fair to learn the lessons of the past and not to do that in the future. And I think modern industrial strategy is not about providing subsidy to individual businesses, and certainly not to, as it were, sort of rescue them. I think it's, if you're to take a different analogy, it's more about sort of picking races that we want to compete in, races that are likely to be run by companies and countries in the world, and in which we have some reason to want to be competitive. And so that's how I think we should think about it. And in a world in which there isn't much money, as was evident from the statement last week, the spending review last week, and in a world in which subsidy for companies is not the prime reason for policy, there are so many levers that government has that it ought, it seems to me, to be deliberate and reflective in deploying. I mean, we spend as a country £22 billion a year on research and development, publicly funded, obviously much more commercially funded. Deciding what the priorities for that £22 billion a year seems to be absolutely something that is not just desirable, but frankly essential. Education and training. I have the privilege of being at a very successful university now. But policy towards universities, how we fund students, in what disciplines, these are absolutely central to our industrial future. And training, not always done well, and I think still one of the big challenges that we have. Absolutely, government is heavily involved in that. The financial system, financing, whether it's startups, scale-ups, the conduct of the financial system, that is something that government can shape. The regulation that pertains to different sectors, including robotics, as we're talking about today, these are very important. The powers that local leaders have to reinforce local clusters, these are all important. So there are so many areas in which it seems to me that government should be well informed and should take, as certainly I did when I was developing industrial strategy, take the advice of people, including many in this room, but across the country, as to how our policy should be set on innovation, on training, on finance. Anyway, that was a kind of lament for the fact that unaccountably we dropped that. But I'm really delighted that the incoming government, not so new now, stated very clearly in its manifesto that it would have an industrial strategy. And I was pleased that they came to me and asked if I would serve on the advisory council of that, responsible for the development of the industrial strategy. It's a committee, it's a council consisting of about 15 people from business, from research institutions, from the trade unions, from the city, designed to give advice to ministers in developing this. I stress that it's advisory because it's ministers that decide, and the white paper is about to be published. The commitment was always to publish it in the spring. You'll have noticed it's very warm outside, and the flowers are in full bloom, and Midsummer's Day is I think next week. Only I think in the world of Westminster and Whitehall does June qualify as the spring, whether it's for financial statements or all the rest. As long as it's done before July, it's the spring, not the summer. So my confident prediction is that they will, if only technically, meet politically, if not meteorologically, the commitment to publish it in the spring, and so we should expect it in the next few days, probably next week. Precisely what day it is might depend on whether Mr. Trump has any surprises to knock it off the agenda, and they'll clearly want to have some attention paid to it. But it is about to come up. But I think it's worth sort of pausing for a second to kind of reflect on the fact, not to be too egotistical, that they appointed an Industrial Strategy Council and appointed me to it, because I think there's something to be read into that. They're independent people. This is not a political initiative just driven by politicians. There was an attempt to try to distill from opinion across the country, different sectors, what was in there. And the fact that the current Secretary of State and the Chancellor appointed one of their predecessors from a different party, I think says something about the intention that this should be not a partisan issue, that it should be a matter of, in aspiration at least, kind of national consensus, and that it should endure rather than be a short-term phenomenon, all of which I think are commendable. As anyone here would attest to, a short-term strategy is a contradiction in terms. So I think to set it up in that way from the outset is something that I applaud. It would be very unfair, having been in the position of the Secretary of State, to kind of steal his thunder when he's got a big announcement to make in the next few days. And also, as I said, it's an advisory group, and I haven't seen the very final version. But I don't think I'm breaching confidences in if I could give a few kind of steers and sort of highlights as to what to look out for in this, obviously geared to the discussions that we're having here today. The first thing is that manufacturing will have a very prominent place in the industrial strategy, as is necessary. In the green paper that was consulted on, advanced manufacturing was one of 8 sectors that was chosen and highlighted for particular focus, not out of sentiment or anything other than a hard-headed assessment that if you're thinking about the future growth of the economy and our competitiveness, then advanced manufacturing has to be part of that in and of itself, but also for the connections it has, frankly, to many of our services industries across the country. Make UK, the manufacturers' trade body, attribute over £200 billion of national income to manufacturing. I think my sense is that the government absolutely recognise the importance of that and its requirement to grow. And I think that will be very important to have that recognition of manufacturing there. The second observation I would make is that I think it'll be a theme of the strategy that transforming productivity is one of our biggest national challenges and will have a particular focus in the industrial strategy. Everyone here knows that the The rate of increase of productivity has more or less flatlined since the financial crisis in 2008-9. There are competing explanations for it, and actually, in my view, there are competing reasons for it. I don't think there's a single reason, and many of the policies and commitments made in the industrial strategy will be about driving improvements and restoring growth, sustainable growth to productivity. And within that, it won't surprise you to know, because everyone in this room experiences it and delivers it, that one of the most important sources of national productivity growth is improvements in manufacturing processes, especially in automation, especially in the field of robotics that unites everyone here. And so kind of making those connections, again, one of the importance of a strategy, just to be kind of clear about, if you want to improve prosperity, you've got to improve productivity. How are you going to improve productivity? You need to look at the sources of productivity. That comes from automation. That means you need to invest in robotics. I think that sort of logical chain is very important, that should be made explicit and public. Within productivity gains and within automation and the application of robotics and other technologies, I think there are two aspects, two kind of areas that should be reflected on. One is that we need to continue to advance in the cutting edge of practice, in new discoveries, new applications of technologies. And we're very fortunate in this country. We've got institutions, including, as I said at the beginning, mine, the University of Warwick and WMG, and others across the country, whose mission is to make new discoveries, new applications, new connections that haven't been made before. And I think it's really important that institutions like the MTC, like WMG and others, exist so that companies outside the big OEMs that may not have the facilities to develop and to test new experimental technologies can use the facilities here, partially publicly funded, to advance that national need, that national requirement, to make sure that we continue to be at the frontier of development in new technologies. That's incredibly important, and I hope that will be reinforced in the industrial strategy. But there's another dimension to it that everyone here knows, that even sort of leaving aside the next frontier, the installation and the take-up of technologies that are already available in this country now is by no means consistent. Andy Haldane, who was previously the chief economist of the Bank of England, talked about the long tail of low productivity among UK firms coexisting with some of the most productive and the most innovative firms literally on the planet. And it's a kind of mathematical equation. If you can bring that long tail up, increase the productivity performance closer to the average, that can have a big impact on our national productivity and therefore national prosperity. So diffusing and improving the take-up of existing technologies, I think, is also something that we should be targeting, and I've reason to hope that the industrial strategy will recognise that. You know better than I, you're the experts in this, but in the field of robotics, this is very evident. We do have some brilliant examples of innovation. I gather that you've been hearing about them this morning through some case studies, including in some SMEs that are part of that vanguard. But it's also the case, in fact, it's the case, sadly, on average, that the deployment of robots, for example, lags behind, on average, in this country, other countries. I mean, figures that I was looking at, that we've got twice the number of robots per worker in the US and in the Netherlands, for example, than we have here, 3 times in Sweden. So I think there needs to be, if we want to improve productivity, we want to improve prosperity, we need to have a big push to diffuse and to spread out the take-up of technology. Now, some of you may be familiar with the Made Smarter project. It was a review that I commissioned when I was Secretary of State for these matters from Jürgen Meyer, then the UK MD of Siemens, which was all about spreading industrial digitalization, as he called it, and providing not just funds, but partnership and mentoring, literally sort of tying businesses together, well, not literally, but introducing businesses together so that they could be taken through the steps by people that had done it, helped people that needed to do it, helped by people that had done it. I think that's a really important initiative, and I hope there was some announcement for some new funding for Made Smarter. I hope that will continue, and I again hope the industrial strategy will reinforce that. There's something that I remember, and probably many more people here will, the Manufacturing Advisory Service, MAS. I know that when I was first responsible for some of these matters, when I was in opposition, the MAS, providing advice and support, not always, or not about money, but providing expertise to manufacturers. I thought that was again an initiative that sadly bit the dust, but whether in the same form, whether called that or something else, I think there's merit in thinking again about that. It's not just the knowledge of technologies and mentoring help in implementing them in companies that have been slow to take advantage of them. There are other matters that I think need to be addressed if we are to succeed in driving productivity forward through automation and robotics. Skills, for example. You can have all the technology in the world, but if you don't have a workforce that is trained and able productively to use it, then you're stymied. And so it seems to me that our skill system needs to be reoriented and joined up. If we're going to invest, as I hope we will be, in new technological developments, we need simultaneously to invest in the development of skills in the workforce that can push that on. And the same with finance. Deploying technology costs money. And if it's to be deployed in existing businesses, not startups, we know that in the UK there's a particular problem with scaling up businesses, getting the finance for scaling up businesses. We're much better than we were at startups. In fact, countries like Japan are coming to look at how we've managed to foster quite a positive environment for startups. But we're not so good at scale-ups. And scale-up, if you think of it as an abstract term, that literally means attracting the investment to procure the technology that's needed to be competitive in new markets. So I think there needs to be a financial dimension to this as well. Which brings me on, just to kind of to bring things to a conclusion, in one of the other essential purposes of an industrial strategy. Obviously, a strategy is a plan for the future. That's the sense of the word strategy that most people have. But all of you that are in businesses that have strategies, I think will recognise that there's another sense of what a strategy is that I think is very important, which is a strategy can be integrative. It can bring together different strands, in this case of policy, of investments, to make sure they kind of point in the same direction. And I'm sure I'm not going to shock anyone by saying that it's sometimes the case that different departments of government do not always point in the same direction, and the policies are not always perfectly aligned, and in some cases they're prone to diverge and to undermine each other. If I think of our colleagues in the automotive sector, perhaps dealing with electric vehicles or autonomy there, you're probably dealing with the business and trade department, the transport department, if it's batteries, the energy and net zero department, the science, innovation, technology department, probably on skills, the Department for Education. So you've got a handful of different government departments, and if you really want to make a strategic advance, all of those policies need to be brought together, brought into alignment. And one of the big, I think, opportunities, which I hope this strategy will evidence, is the advantage in having a sort of clearinghouse of the strategy, resolve some of those dilemmas in many cases, and has a coherent view of the future. So I look forward. I haven't seen the very final version, but I think it's an important moment that we return to industrial strategy. I think it's been done by the government in a serious way. The one thing that I would say, and probably doesn't need to be said to you, but sometimes in politics, the goal is to kind of publish the document and have a big fanfare around it. But that, when it comes to industrial strategy, that seems to me not the thing. A strategy is there to inform future decision making, to communicate to investors domestically and around the world, what our policies are, what our priorities are. So it is the implementation, and it's the influence it has on future decisions that I think are key, not whether it has kind of bells and whistles on the day. Slightly unhelpfully, the British press is usually sort of quick to kind of declare things to be kind of glasses half full rather than half empty rather than half full. That doesn't matter. I think the test of the strategy will be in 3 or 4 years' time when we look back at decisions that government has taken, decisions that investors have made. Have they been helped by the clarity and certainty of policy? So it's been a kind of rocky ride since I first developed industrial strategy. I developed one, it was abolished, but here we are, full circle. There's a new one. I think it's good that it's taking place. I think it is good that manufacturing is likely to be as prominent as it is. I think it is good that the focus on productivity will be there, and therefore that the focus on enhancements, improvements to productivity, many of which will come from this sector, if I can call it that, or the set of expertise that exists in this room, both in terms of new innovation and in terms of rolling it out, supported by different systems, whether it's skills or finance. If that all comes together, then it doesn't solve all our problems, but I think it gives us a good platform from which to advance. Or to go back to my other analogy, if this is a race that we're going to compete in, then we can power out of the blocks. So thank you for letting me come today, and great that you're having this conference. Thanks so much.